Day 2, the Constitution Convention. The primary goal of the Constitution Convention was to revise the Article of Confederation in order to create a stronger federal government, adopt a single form of currency, establish a more effective and efficient way of enacting and enforcing laws. 55 delegates attended the Constitutional Convention. All of them were white men, many of which had served in the Continental Congress and fought in the Revolutionary War. George Washington was unanimously elected as the Constitutional Convention president. The Virginia delegations uh, proposed the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan sought the creation of an executive and judicial branch of government, in addition to the already existing legislative branch. The Virginia Plan also proposed that a state population would determine the number of representatives a state had in Congress. After the Virginia Plan was proposed, not all of the delegates agreed to it, which led us to some of the delegates voiced their concerns that under the Virginia Plan, states would be forced to surrender too much authority and power to the new federal government. What do you think is the meaning of this political cartoon? Meanwhile, the Virginia Plan also called for a statesman's population to determine how many representatives each state would have in Congress. Critical thinking questions. Why might this clause of the Virginia Plan cause so much controversy? Delegates, especially those from smaller, less populated states, felt that their states would have less of a voice in the national matters because they had less representatives in Congress than the states that had larger populations. Populations by state according to the 1790 U.S. Census. Delaware, Rhode Island, Georgia, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Connecticut, South Carolina, Maryland, New York, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia. This led to an issue that caused much division amongst the delegates. How to determine the number of representatives each state would have in Congress. The division grew so intense that some of the delegates threatened to leave the Constitutional Convention altogether and go back to their home states with no resolution to replace or even revise the Articles of Confederation. After much debate, the delegates unanimously agreed to something known as the Connecticut Congress, better known now as the Great Congress, which with this conference, the delegates came to an agreement on the following. There'd be two bodies of legislative that make up Congress, not one as originally proposed by the Virginia Plan, a House of Representatives and a Senate. In addition, the Great Conference meant that a state's representation in the House of Representatives would be determined by state's population. Every state would receive representation in the Senate by two senators, no matter how large or small the state's population was. The outcome of the Great Conference led to yet another issue, though. It could be argued that the issue of slavery first became a major point of serious contention and debate during the Constitutional Convention. since a state's population would be now determine how many representatives a state received in the House of Representatives. The northern states felt that slaves shouldn't be counted toward the state's population. They argued that because slaves were considered the property of a citizen and not citizens themselves, they shouldn't be included in the state's population count. For a variety of reasons, the northern states had far fewer slaves from the southern states. The southern states, on the other hand, argued that slaves should count toward a state's population because slaves were people. As stated on the previous slide, since the southern states had far more slaves than the northern states, it was to their advantage to have slaves included in the state's population count because it would increase their overall population. This would mean that they were more representatives serving in the House of Representation of Representatives. In order to resolve this issue, the delegates agreed to the three-fifth compromise. This despite this dispute was settled by agreeing that every five enslaved people would equate to three free citizens for the state's population. How is this a compromise? Say, for example, a state had 10,000 enslaved people living in it. With the three-fifths compromise, only three-fifths of those 10,000 people would count toward the state's population. So even though there's 10,000 slaves living in the state, only 6,000 would be counted toward the state's population. To calculate this, take the number of enslaved people and multiply by zero point 0.6. On the next slide, you will be able to see exactly why this was such an important issue. Remember, when you look at the infographic that you're about to see, what states favored having slaves count toward their populations and which ones didn't? Southern states with high slave population was blue. Northern states with low slave populations is green.